What happens when a single moment of anger, a plate of risotto thrown in a high-end restaurant, becomes the catalyst that shatters one life and redeems another? This isn't just a story about a rich boy and a poor girl. It's the story of Arya, a waitress buried in debt whose world is upended by an act of public humiliation. It's the story of Julian, a billionaire heir suffocating under the weight of his father's expectations. But most of all, it's the story of what happened the next day, when the boy's father, the legendary Titan Arthur Davenport, didn't show up with an apology but with the keys to a brand new Rolls-Royce. The reason why will change everything you think you know about power, forgiveness, and the true meaning of wealth. The Gilded Sparrow wasn't just a restaurant, it was a theater. Perched on the 60th floor of a skyscraper overlooking Central Park, its clientele was a curated collection of New York City's financial gods and cultural royalty. Every night, multi-million-dollar deals were sealed over seared foie gras, and reputations were made or broken with the clinking of crystal glasses. For the staff, it was a different kind of performance, a grueling ballet of perfect service where a single misstep could mean the end of a career. Arya Montgomery knew the steps by heart. At 24, she moved with a practiced grace that belied the exhaustion settling deep in her bones. Each shift was a 12-hour marathon in uncomfortable shoes, all to pay for her mother's mounting medical bills and the art history degree she was determined to finish. Her uniform, a stark black dress, so different from the vibrant canvases she dreamed of, felt like a second skin. It was armor. Tonight, the armor felt thin. The air in the restaurant was electric, with the kind of tension that only serious money could generate. Her station included Table 7, the most coveted corner booth with a panoramic view of the glittering city. Its occupant was Julian Davenport, the 28-year-old heir to the Davenport Industries empire. He was a man who seemed sculpted from ambition and impatience, with a jawline as sharp as his Brissoni suit and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He wasn't dining. He was holding court, his laptop open, his Patek Philippe watch glinting as his hands sliced through the air. He barked orders into his AirPods, his voice a low, serrated edge that cut through the restaurant's polite hum. Arya had served him before. He was a notoriously difficult customer, demanding, dismissive, and a terrible tipper. He treated the staff like inconvenient furniture. Tonight, however, he was on another level. He was in the middle of a hostile takeover of a tech firm, a deal his father, the formidable Arthur Davenport, had entrusted to him as a final test. The pressure radiated from him in palpable waves. The limoncello risotto with seared scallops he had snapped at Arya earlier without making eye contact. And bring another bottle of the 05 Sassicaia. Don't interrupt me again unless the building is on fire. For 2 hours, Arya orbited his table, a silent ghost refilling his water-clearing plates with practiced invisibility. The risotto arrived a creamy, fragrant masterpiece from their Michelin-starred chef. Julian ignored it, his focus welded to the screen. Another hour passed. The risotto grew cold. His face grew tighter, his voice on the phone call becoming more venomous. Arya could hear snippets. Unacceptable. Leverage. Liquidate their assets. It was nearing 11 p.m. Arya was clearing a nearby table when it happened. A busboy, new and nervous, stumbled, sending a tray of glasses crashing to the marble floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the hushed dining room. Every head turned. Julian's head snapped up his face a mask of fury, but his eyes didn't land on the terrified busboy. They landed on Arya, who was the closest staff member to him. At that exact moment, as she stepped back to give the cleanup crew space, the heel of her worn shoe caught on the thick carpet's edge. She lurched, her balance gone for a split second. Her hip bumped the corner of Julian's heavy oak table. It wasn't a hard impact, but it was enough. The table jostled. His laptop slid an inch. A few drops of water from his glass sloshed onto the keyboard. Julian's video call froze. "What the hell?" he hissed, his face draining of color as he frantically tried to reconnect. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Davenport. It was an Arya began, her heart plummeting. "An accident," he roared, ripping the AirPods from his ears. He stood up, his 6'2" frame towering over her. The entire restaurant was now watching, frozen, in a state of suspended shock. "An accident? You clumsy idiot. Do you have any idea what you just did? That was a $50 billion deal." His voice echoed in the cavernous space. He looked from his now dark laptop screen to the plate of cold, congealed risotto. His face twisted into a snarl of pure, unrestrained rage. The pressure, the fear of failing his father, the humiliation of a technical glitch in his moment of triumph, it all coalesced into a single, ugly point and aimed itself at her. "You want to be useless?" He spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You want to ruin things? Fine. Here." Before Arya or anyone else could react, he grabbed the plate of risotto. With a flick of his wrist, he didn't just throw it, he flung it. The creamy saffron-yellow rice and perfectly seared scallops splattered across the front of Arya's black dress, the cold, greasy mess clinging to her chest and sliding down her skirt. A single scallop landed on her cheek before plopping onto the floor. Silence. A profound, suffocating silence fell over the Gilded Sparrow. You could hear the distant wail of a siren from 60 stories below. Arya stood there, paralyzed, the stench of lemon and seafood filling her nostrils. She felt hundreds of eyes on her, not with sympathy, but with the morbid curiosity of spectators at a gladiatorial game. The humiliation was a physical force, hot and sharp, worse than any physical blow. She could feel the tears welling, but her pride, the only thing she had left, built a dam. She would not cry. Not here. Julian looked down at her, his chest heaving, a flicker of something shock regret in his eyes for a barest second before it was extinguished by cold arrogance. He threw a black American Express card on the table. "For the damages," he said, his voice dripping with condescending scorn. "And for the dry cleaning." He gathered his things and strode towards the exit, the sea of diners parting for him as if he were a king. No one stopped him. No one said a word. The restaurant manager, a man named Mr. Dubois, finally rushed over. His face was pale, his expression not of concern for Arya, but of sheer terror for the restaurant's reputation. "Miss Montgomery," he said, his voice a low, urgent whisper. "Go to the staff room. Immediately." Arya looked down at herself, at the disgusting yellow stain that felt like a brand. She hadn't done anything wrong yet. She was the one being ushered away in shame. As she walked, her back straight, her chin held high, she could feel the whispers starting, the phones being discreetly raised. She was no longer a waitress. She was a spectacle. In the cold, sterile hallway leading to the staff locker room, the dam finally broke. The silent, hot tears streamed down her face, each one a testament to a world that felt impossibly, brutally unfair. The staff locker room, usually a noisy haven of gossip and shared complaints, was silent when Arya entered. Her colleagues averted their eyes, busying themselves with their lockers. their faces a mixture of pity and fear. Pity for her, and fear of the man who could do that and walk away without consequence. They knew, as she did, that in the war between a billionaire's son and a waitress, the waitress always loses. She peeled off the soiled uniform, the cold risotto clinging to her skin like a second shameful layer. She scrubbed her face and chest raw in the small washroom, but she couldn't wash away the feeling of utter degradation. The manager, Mr. Dubois, was waiting for her when she emerged in her street-clothes jeans and a threadbare sweater. He couldn't meet her eye. He held a small white envelope. "Aria," he began, his voice strained. "We have to let you go. Mr. Davenport is one of our most important patrons. His father's company holds its annual gala here. We can't risk that relationship." Aria stared at him, a hollow feeling spreading through her chest. "I was bumped into Mr. Dubois. I didn't do anything." "I know," he said, and for a moment he looked genuinely sorry. "But it doesn't matter. It's not fair. But this is the way it is." The envelope contained her final week's pay and $1,000 in power. "Mr. Davenport left this," he added, pushing it into her hand. "For your trouble." "Blood money," Aria whispered, but she took it. She had to. Her mother's prescription for a new medication was due tomorrow, and it cost $800. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. The subway ride home to her tiny apartment in Queens was a blur. The faces around her seemed to mock her their mundane realities, a world away from the gilded cage she had just been thrown out of. Her apartment, usually a cozy sanctuary, filled with art books and sketches, felt like a prison. The eviction notice taped to the inside of her door, a stark reminder of the 2 months' rent she was behind, seemed to laugh at her. She didn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the sunrise paint the sky in hues of pink and orange colors she would normally rush to capture in her sketchbook. But tonight, they just looked pale and washed out. The internet was already buzzing. A diner at a nearby table had filmed the entire incident. The video was grainy shot from a distance, but it was unmistakable. "Billionaire brat J.D. Jr. assaults waitress with food," blared the headlines of gossip blogs. The comments section was a cesspool of opinions. Some defended her, but many more defended him, or worse, made cruel jokes about her. She was a meme, a viral tragedy, her worst moment consumed as fleeting entertainment by millions of strangers. Meanwhile, across the city in a penthouse that looked down on the world, Julian Davenport was also awake. The deal had gone through. Despite the technical glitch, his team had recovered, and the acquisition was complete. He had won. He should have been celebrating, but the victory felt hollow, tainted. The image of Aria's face, the shock, the hurt, the way she refused to cry, was seared into his mind. He poured himself a glass of Macallan 25, the amber liquid doing nothing to soothe the unfamiliar knot in his stomach. He was a Davenport. Davenports didn't feel regret. They felt triumph. They didn't apologize. They moved on. His father's voice echoed in his head, a constant mantra from his childhood. "Empathy is a weakness, Julian. Compassion is a liability. In our world, you are either a shark or you are chum." He had acted like a shark. He had asserted his dominance. So why did he feel like the chum? He scoffed, chasing the thought away with another gulp of scotch. She was just a waitress, an insignificant cog in a machine he owned. The $1,000 he'd left was more than she probably made in 2 weeks. He had compensated her. The account was settled. He picked up his phone and opened the stock market app, forcing his mind back to what mattered: numbers, profits, power. He had a legacy to uphold. He had a father to impress. That was all that mattered. He finally fell into a restless sleep just as the sun was rising, dreaming not of his victory, but of a pair of defiant, tearless eyes looking back at him from across a sea of shattered crystal and spilled risotto. Arya, on the other hand, had a different kind of morning. After a sleepless night, she called her mother. She lied, telling her the restaurant had simply changed her hours and that everything was fine. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. She spent hours online, applying for any service job she could find. Coffee shops, diners, bars, her art history degree, feeling more useless than ever. Every application felt like a small surrender, another step away from the life she dreamed of. By noon, despair was a heavy cloak. The $1,000 from Julian was a ticking clock. It would cover the prescription and maybe a week of groceries, but it wouldn't stop the eviction or pay the tuition that was due. She was standing in her small kitchen, staring at a blank canvas she hadn't touched in months, when a sound from the street below broke her reverie. It was a low, powerful purr, the kind of engine noise that doesn't just pass by but announces its arrival. It was a sound that didn't belong in her working-class Queens neighborhood with its aging sedans and delivery trucks. Curious, she peered through the window. Parked directly in front of her dilapidated apartment building was a car that seemed to have materialized from another dimension. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom, its body the color of polished obsidian gleaming under the afternoon sun. It was so out of place it looked like a spaceship. A chauffeur, in a crisp grey uniform, stood by the rear door, looking up at her. Building his eyes, scanning the apartment numbers. Arya's heart began to pound. It had to be a mistake. Or perhaps it was for a neighbor who had won the lottery. But then her buzzer rang, a harsh, insistent sound that echoed in her small apartment. She hesitantly pressed the intercom button. "Hello." A voice, calm, deep, and impossibly refined, came through the speaker, cutting through the static. "Miss Arya Montgomery, my name is Arthur Davenport. I believe you had an encounter with my son last night. May I have a moment of your time?" The name hit Arya like a physical blow. Arthur Davenport. Not Julian. Arthur, the patriarch, the architect of the Davenport Empire. A man whose name was whispered with a mixture of awe and fear on Wall Street. He was a legend, a ghost who rarely made public appearances, preferring to pull the strings from the shadows of his corporate throne. And he was standing outside her building. Her mind raced. Was he here to threaten her? To buy her silence? The viral video must have reached him. She imagined a team of ruthless lawyers with a non-disclosure agreement and a check designed to make this whole ugly incident disappear. Her hand trembled as she pressed the button to unlock the building's main door. "Third floor apartment 3B, she managed to say, her voice barely a whisper. She had a few frantic seconds to survey her tiny apartment. The pile of art books on the floor, the chipped paint on the windowsill, the single wilting orchid her mother had given her. It was a world away from the one the man now ascending her creaky stairs inhabited. She felt a sudden fierce wave of defensiveness. This was her home. It was honest. It was real. A knock, firm and polite, sounded on her door. She took a deep breath, straightened her back, and opened it. The man standing in her hallway was not what she expected. He was older, perhaps in his late 60s, with a mane of silver hair swept back from a high forehead. He wasn't dressed in the flashy style of his son. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored charcoal suit, a white shirt and no tie. His eyes were the most startling feature. They were the same stormy grey as Julian's, but where his son's held a restless fire, Arthur Davenport's held a deep, unnerving calm. They were the eyes of a man who had seen everything and was surprised by nothing. He wasn't imposing like a predator. He was imposing like a mountain. "Miss Montgomery," he said, his voice even more resonant in person. He extended a hand. "Thank you for seeing me." His handshake was firm, dry, and brief. He didn't look around her apartment with disdain, as she had feared. Instead, his gaze fell on a large, unfinished charcoal sketch of the Brooklyn Bridge that was propped against her wall. He studied it for a long moment, a flicker of genuine interest in his eyes. "You have a remarkable talent for capturing light," he said. It wasn't a platitude. It was a quiet statement of fact. The unexpected compliment disarmed her. "Thank you," she said, her voice tight. "Mr. Davenport, why are you here?" He met her gaze directly. "I am here first and foremost to offer you an apology. Not on behalf of my son. He is a grown man who must account for his own actions. I am apologizing on behalf of my family's name, which he tarnished with his despicable behavior last night." There was no artifice in his voice, no hint of a PR-managed script. The apology felt sincere, which was even more confusing. "I saw the video, of course," he continued, his hands clasped behind his back. "And I made some inquiries. I spoke with a Mr. Dubois at the Gilded Sparrow. He informed me that your employment was terminated." "He said he had no choice," Arya said, a bitter edge to her words. "People always have a choice," Arthur countered smoothly. "He simply made the one that was easiest for him. That, however, is not your concern. It is mine." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her small living room again, this time noting the eviction notice she had hastily tried to cover with a stack of mail. His eyes missed nothing. "Miss Montgomery, I understand your financial situation is precarious. My son left you what he would consider a generous sum, an act I find almost as insulting as the initial offense. It implies that your dignity can be bought, and the price is a mere $1,000. He reached into his inner jacket pocket, and Arya braced herself for the checkbook. But he didn't pull out a check. He produced a small velvet-lined box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on the black velvet, was a single exquisitely crafted car key, the iconic double R of the Rolls-Royce emblem gleaming under the dim light of her apartment. Arya stared at it, speechless. Her brain couldn't process what she was seeing. It was a prank. It had to be. "I assume you're familiar with the vehicle parked downstairs," Arthur said calmly. "It is a new Phantom. It is registered in your name. It is yours." Arya found her voice. "What? Why, I don't understand. Is this a joke? I can't even afford the insurance on a car like that, let alone find a place to park it. The insurance, maintenance, and a private parking space near this building have all been prepaid for 5 years," he said, as if discussing the weather. "And it is not a joke. This is hush money," Arya said, the realization dawning, a cold anger replacing her confusion. "This is a car worth $500,000 to make me forget being publicly assaulted and losing my job. You think you can just drive up here in your fancy car and buy my silence with another, more expensive fancy car?" She was shaking now, a torrent of righteous fury breaking through her shock. "My life is not a business transaction, Mr. Davenport. I'm not some asset to be managed on your balance sheet. You can take your car and your apology and—" "It is not hush money, Miss Montgomery." Arthur interrupted, his voice cutting through her anger not with force, but with an absolute, unshakable authority that silenced her immediately. He took a step closer. "Money is a tool, nothing more. For some it is a weapon. For my son, it has become a shield he hides behind. For you, it could be freedom. But this," he said, gesturing to the key, "is not a gift. It is an offer. It is the first part of a proposition I have come here to make." He looked at her, his grey eyes intense, searching. "I am not here to buy your silence. I'm here to hire your strength. I have seen how my son behaves. I have seen the man he is becoming, and I find him lacking. Last night he tried to humiliate you to break you, but he failed. I saw it in the video. Everyone in that restaurant was either afraid of him or fawning over him. But you stood up covered in his mess, and you looked him in the eye without shedding a tear. You have a spine made of steel, Miss Montgomery." He let that sink in before delivering the final stunning blow. "My son believes he is ready to take over my company. I believe he is a spoiled child who wouldn't last a day in the real world. I am about to put him through it, and I want you to be a part of it. This isn't about the car, Aria. The car is just to get your attention. This is about a job that pays far more than any waitress position. I'm offering you the chance to get your life back, and in the process help me teach my son a lesson he so desperately needs to learn." Aria stared at him, her mind reeling. This wasn't happening. The father of the man who had ruined her life was in her apartment offering her a Rolls-Royce and a mysterious job to... what? Get revenge. Teach a lesson. It was insane. It was a plot from a movie. What kind of job?" she whispered, the world tilting on its axis. Arthur Davenport smiled a thin, wintry smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "The kind of job where you will have more power over Julian's future than he does." Aria felt as though she were caught in a waking dream. The smell of old books and turpentine in her apartment mingled with the faint, expensive scent of Arthur Davenport's cologne. The Rolls-Royce key sat on her rickety coffee table, an alien artifact in her world of second-hand furniture and mounting bills. "Power over your son," Aria repeated, suspicion lacing her tone. "What does that even mean? What do you want me to do?" "Be his keeper, his babysitter." "Nothing so mundane," Arthur replied, his calm demeanor never wavering. "I am the chairman of the Davenport Foundation, the philanthropic arm of our company. It is a multi-billion-dollar endowment that funds projects in education, the arts, and urban renewal. It was my late wife's passion, and it is the heart of this family's legacy, a heart my son has shown no interest in." He walked over to her wall of sketches again, his eyes lingering on a detailed drawing of a homeless man she'd seen sleeping on a park bench. "Julian sees value only in profit margins and stock prices. He doesn't understand that true power lies not in what you accumulate, but in what you build. He needs to learn that. He needs to get his hands dirty." Arthur turned back to face her. The foundation is about to launch its most ambitious project, yet the revitalization of the old Red Hook Community Arts Center, a place that has been neglected for decades. It requires not just money, but a deep understanding of the community's needs of art's power to heal and of the grit it takes to build something from nothing. Qualities you, Miss Montgomery, seem to possess, and my son demonstrably lacks. The proposition began to take shape, and it was more audacious than Aria could have imagined. "I am temporarily reassigning Julian," Arthur stated. "Effective immediately, He is removed from all merger and acquisition duties. His corporate accounts will be frozen. His access to the company jet, his penthouse, his expense accounts, all suspended. He will be given a small stipend enough to live on, but not in the style to which he is accustomed. His new and only job will be to serve as the project manager for the Red Hook revitalization. Arya stared at him, trying to comprehend the scale of what he was proposing. He was going to strip his son of everything. But a project manager needs a budget, a team, she started. He will have a budget, Arthur confirmed, but he will not control it. He will report to the Foundation's new project director. Every expenditure, every decision, every hire must be approved by this director. He will, for the first time in his life, be accountable to someone else. Someone whose life experience is the antithesis of his own. The unspoken words hung in the air between them. Her heart hammered against her ribs as the puzzle pieces clicked into place. "You want me to be the project director?" she said, the statement coming out as a breath of disbelief. "Precisely," Arthur said, a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. "You are an art history student. You understand the subject matter. You come from a world where every dollar is earned and respected. You have faced adversity with resilience. You are in every way the perfect person to oversee this project, and by extension, my son. Your official title will be Director of Community Arts Initiatives for the Davenport Foundation." The room was spinning. A few hours ago, she was an unemployed waitress facing eviction. Now she was being offered a directorship at a major foundation, a position of authority over the very man who had tried to destroy her. It was a dizzying, terrifying prospect. "I don't have any experience in management," she argued, the voice of self-doubt whispering in her ear. "I've never run a project, never managed a budget." "You have managed to survive in one of the world's most expensive cities while paying for your mother's care and pursuing a degree," Arthur countered. "That is a more impressive feat of management than anything my son has ever accomplished with the safety net of my fortune. I am not hiring your resume, Miss Montgomery. I am hiring your character. You will have the full support of the Foundation's staff, accountants, lawyers, engineers. Your job is to be the conscience. The final say. You will decide if Julian's plans are viable, if his proposals are respectful to the community, if his work is worthy of the Davenport name." The offer was a lifeline wrapped in a velvet trap. It was a chance to reclaim her dignity, to secure her mother's future, and to finally finish her degree without the constant gnawing fear of poverty. But it was also a pact with a man who wielded his family like chess pieces. She would be a pawn in his game, a tool to reshape his son. "And what happens to Julian if he fails?" she asked. "Or if he refuses?" "If he refuses, he is cut off, completely," Arthur said, his voice turning to ice. "If he fails under your direction, well, that will prove my point, won't it? He will learn that his name alone is not enough. He must earn his place, or he will have no place at all." Arya looked from the powerful, calculating man in front of her to the Rolls-Royce key on her table. The key wasn't a gift. It was a symbol. It was the key to a gilded crane. She could stay in her own prison of poverty. She could step into his, a place of immense power and dangerous games. She thought of her mother's tired smile, of the shame she felt taking Julian's hush money, of the condescending look on Mr. Dubois's face as he fired her. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice. It was about flipping the board on a game that had always been rigged against people like her. "What's the salary?" she asked, her voice steady, now devoid of the earlier tremor. Arthur allowed himself another small, approving smile. "Your starting salary will be $250,000 a year, plus a housing allowance and full benefits. Your mother will be enrolled in our company's executive health plan, effective tomorrow." That sealed it. The promise of the best medical care for her mother was something she would walk through fire for. Arya looked Arthur Davenport straight in the eye. "When do I start?" He nodded a silent acknowledgement of the contract they had just forged. "My driver will take you to get the necessary paperwork signed. You start tomorrow morning. Julian will be expecting the project manager at the Red Hook site at 9 a.m. I suggest you don't be late." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "One more thing, Miss Montgomery. The car. It's not just for show. I expect you to use it. Drive it to that meeting tomorrow. I want my son to understand from the very first moment that the world he knew has been turned upside down, and you are the one who turned it." With that, he was gone. Arya stood alone in her apartment, the silence roaring in her ears. She picked up the heavy key. It felt cold, solid, and impossibly real. She was no longer Arya Montgomery, the waitress. She was Arya Montgomery, Director of Community Arts Initiatives. And tomorrow, she was going to war. Julian Davenport woke up to a world that no longer belonged to him. The call from his father had come at 6 a.m., a brutal surgical strike. There was no negotiation. His corporate cards were declined. The locks to his penthouse office were changed. The pilot of his private jet informed him the aircraft was indefinitely grounded for maintenance. His father's voice had been devoid of emotion, a cold instrument of judgment. "You have become a caricature, Julian, a tabloid headline. You embarrassed the family, but more importantly, you revealed a profound weakness of character. Your test is no longer on Wall Street. It's in Red Hook. A car will pick you up at 8. Now, standing on a cracked, weed-strewn sidewalk in a desolate corner of Brooklyn, Julian felt like an astronaut stranded on a hostile planet. The building before him was a husk, a forgotten brick warehouse with boarded-up windows and graffiti-scarred walls. The air smelled of salt from the nearby bay and urban decay. He who was accustomed to boardrooms with skyline views was now tasked with turning this ruin into an arts center. It was a joke, a punishment designed to humiliate him. He was dressed for battle in a tailored suit, but here he just looked absurdly out of place. He kicked at a loose piece of gravel, his rage a bitter acid in his throat. This was all because of that waitress. That insignificant, clumsy girl had somehow managed to topple his entire world. His father was overreacting, senile even. Julian would play along with this little game, do the bare minimum, and wait for his father to come to his senses. At precisely 9 a.m., a low, familiar purr echoed down the empty street. Julian looked up, expecting the standard black town car his father's company used. Instead, rounding the corner was a vehicle that made his jaw drop. It was a brand-new, gleaming black Rolls-Royce Phantom, the exact model he had been trying to convince his father to add to the corporate fleet. The magnificent car pulled up to the curb, its engine silent, its presence on the derelict street almost comical. The chauffeur's door opened, but it wasn't the usual driver. A young woman in a simple but elegant pantsuit stepped out, her expression composed and unreadable. It was her. The waitress, Arya Montgomery. Julian's brain short-circuited. He stared, his mind refusing to connect the dots. She walked around to the passenger side and opened the door, then looked directly at him. Her eyes were not the eyes of the humiliated victim he remembered. They were cool, confident, and held a glint of something he couldn't quite decipher. Authority. "Mr. Davenport," she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying easily in the morning air. "Good morning. I'm Arya Montgomery, the Director of Community Arts Initiatives for the Foundation. I'll be overseeing this project. Let's begin our walkthrough, shall we?" For a moment, Julian was utterly speechless. He could only stare at her, then at the car, then back at her. The suit, the confidence, the car. None of it made sense. This had to be an elaborate, cruel prank. "You—" He finally sputtered, a harsh, incredulous laugh escaping his lips. "You're my boss." "My father has lost his mind." Arya didn't flinch. "Your father has made his decisions very clear. You report to me. Your first task is to conduct a full structural and environmental assessment of the building. I'll need a preliminary report and a proposed budget on my desk by Friday." She held out a tablet. "All the necessary contacts for approved engineers and contractors are on here. Your stipend has been transferred to a new bank account, the details of which have been sent to your personal email." She was so calm, so professional, it infuriated him more than any outburst would have. He stalked towards her, his anger returning with a vengeance. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing or how you manipulated my father, but this little fantasy of yours is over," he snarled, invading her personal space. "You are nobody. You are a waitress who got lucky. I will not be taking orders from you." Arya stood her ground, not giving up an inch. "You seem to be under a misapprehension, Mr. Davenport. I'm not asking you. I'm telling you. This is your job now. If you choose not to do it, your father's instructions were that I am to inform him immediately and your disinheritance will be made permanent. The choice is yours. Are you the project manager, or are you unemployed?" Her words were like daggers of ice. He saw in her eyes that she wasn't bluffing. She held all the cards, and they both knew it. The humiliation of the situation was absolute. To be brought low, to be stripped of his power was one thing. But to be forced into servitude under the very woman he had so publicly scorned, it was a masterstroke of punishment from his father. He snatched the tablet from her hand, his knuckles white. "Friday." He bit out the word, tasting like poison. "Friday at 5 p.m., she corrected smoothly. "My office is on the 45th floor of the Davenport Tower. I trust you remember where that is." The final perfect insult. She had been given an office in his father's building, the building he was now effectively banished from, save for reporting to her. Without another word, Arya got back into the driver's seat of the Rolls-Royce. She started the engine, the powerful machine, humming to life. She paused for a moment, looking at him through the driver's side window, a silent, unblinking gaze that communicated more than words ever could. The power dynamic had not just been flipped, it had been shattered and remade in her image. Then she drove away, leaving Julian Davenport standing alone in the shadow of the ruined warehouse with nothing but a tablet, a dwindling bank account, and the bitter taste of his own downfall. The real world, his father had said. It felt a lot like hell. The following months were a brutal education for Julian Davenport. The world, stripped of the insulating layer of his family's wealth, was a cold and unforgiving place. His first challenge was simply existing. He had to trade his penthouse for a small sublet apartment in a less than fashionable neighborhood, learn to navigate the subway, and cook his own meals. These were basic life skills he had never needed to acquire, and his initial attempts were clumsy and frustrating. Work was a different level of torment. The Red Hook project was a behemoth of problems. The building was riddled with asbestos. The plumbing was shot, and the roof leaked in a dozen places. The community was wary, viewing the Davenport name with suspicion, seeing them as gentrifying vultures rather than saviors. Julian, accustomed to barking orders and having a team of experts execute his will, was now forced to do the grunt work himself. He had to meet with cynical city officials, negotiate with surly contractors, and attend tense community board meetings where residents aired decades of grievances. His initial report to Arya was a disaster. It was arrogant, dismissive of the community's input, and proposed a budget that was wildly inflated, padded with the kind of luxury expenses he was used to. He presented it in her new office, a space that was minimalist and efficient, a stark contrast to his own former opulent suite, with a defiant swagger expecting her to be intimidated. Arya was not. She reviewed the 50-page document in silence, her expression unreadable. When she finished, she looked up at him, her gaze direct. "This is unacceptable," she said simply. "You've allocated $50,000 for Italian marble in the lobby, but haven't included a wheelchair ramp. You've budgeted for a rooftop wine bar, but have ignored the community's #1 request, a dedicated soundproofed space for after-school music programs. You've treated this as a real estate development, not a community center. This isn't about creating another Soho gallery in Brooklyn. It's about creating a safe and inspiring space for the people who actually live here. Redo it." Julian was livid. "I have managed multi-billion-dollar acquisitions. I think I know how to put together a budget. Clearly you don't," Arya countered, her voice remaining level. "Not one that requires empathy anyway. The community board meeting is on Tuesday. I've scheduled you to present a revised plan. I suggest the new one actually reflects the community's needs." He stormed out of her office, but he had no choice. For the first time, his success wasn't measured in dollars, but in the approval of a woman he despised and a community he didn't understand. Grudgingly, he went back to the drawing board. He spent a week actually walking the streets of Red Hook, talking to people, the single mother who ran the local daycare, the old man who remembered when the warehouse was a bustling factory, the teenager who dreamed of being a street artist. Slowly, painfully, a shift began to occur. He started to see them not as obstacles, but as people. He heard their stories, saw their struggles, and recognized their hopes for the center. His second proposal was different. It was practical, community-focused, and stripped of all vanity. It included the music rooms, a computer lab for job training, and a gallery space dedicated to local artists. When he presented it to Arya, she simply nodded. "This is a start," she said. It was the closest thing to praise he had received in months, and to his own surprise it mattered. Arya, meanwhile, was undergoing her own transformation. She excelled in her new role, proving to be a natural leader. She was decisive, compassionate, and had an intuitive grasp of the project's soul. She spent her days at the foundation, and her evenings in class, her studies now infused with a new purpose. The Davenport Foundation's resources allowed her to ensure her mother received the best possible medical care, and the relief of that burden freed her to focus entirely on her work and studies. She and Julian maintained a strictly professional, often frosty relationship. But she watched him. She saw his frustration, his small, begrudging acts of progress. She saw him one afternoon, his expensive suit jacket off sleeves rolled up, helping a contractor haul away debris because the crew was short-handed. It was a small moment, but it was significant. The turning point came during a particularly harsh winter storm. A pipe burst in the partially renovated building, threatening to flood the newly installed hardwood floors of what was to be the dance studio. Julian got the call at 2 a.m. Without a chauffeur to call or a black car service on standby, he took the subway and a bus arriving, soaked and freezing. He found the site foreman, a grizzled man named Sal, struggling to shut off the main water valve. Together in the dark and freezing cold, they managed to close the valve and spent the next 3 hours sweeping water out of the building. Just as they finished exhausted and covered in grime, a car pulled up. It was the Rolls-Royce. Arya stepped out, holding a large thermos and a bag. "I saw the sight alert on the security feed," she said, her expression softening with something Julian hadn't seen before: genuine concern. She handed him a cup of steaming coffee. "You should have called me." "And have you seen me fail?" Julian said, the words coming out rougher than he intended. "This isn't a failure, Julian," she said softly, looking at the work they had done to save the floor. "This is what it looks like to care about something. You saved the project thousands of dollars tonight." They stood there in the cold pre-dawn light, drinking coffee, the professional barrier between them momentarily dissolved. For the first time, they weren't boss and subordinate or victim and tormentor. They were just two people trying to build something. "Why are you doing this?" Julian asked the question he'd been holding in for months. "Helping me. You could have just let me fail, and my father would have been proven right." Arya looked at the building, its silhouette taking shape against the slowly lightening sky. "Because this isn't about you or me anymore," she said. "And it's not about revenge. It's about this place. These people deserve it. And your father didn't hire me to watch you fail. He hired me to see if you were capable of succeeding." In that moment, Julian saw Arya not as the waitress he had humiliated, but as the leader she had become. He saw her strength, her integrity, and her unwavering focus on the mission. And for the first time, he felt a flicker of something he had never associated with another person: respect. The crucible of Red Hook was burning away his arrogance, leaving behind the faint, promising glimmer of a different kind of man. The Red Hook Community Arts Center opened on a bright, crisp autumn day. The building, once a derelict symbol of urban decay, was now a vibrant hub of life. Music poured from its open doors. The walls were adorned with art from local painters, and the laughter of children echoed from the new dance studio. The entire community had turned out a festive, joyful crowd that stood as a testament to the project's success. Arya stood on the newly built stage, addressing the crowd. She spoke with a quiet confidence that captivated the audience, not as a representative of the powerful Davenport Foundation, but as someone who understood the transformative power of art and community. She thanked the residents, the contractors, and her team. Julian watched from the side out of the spotlight. He was dressed not in a designer suit, but in simple slacks and a button-down shirt. He looked different. The entitled arrogance in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet humility. Over the past year, he had not only managed the project, he had become part of it. He knew the names of the children in the after-school program. He had shared beers with the construction crew after long days. He had discovered a satisfaction in building something tangible that far surpassed the fleeting thrill of a corporate takeover. As Arya finished her speech to thunderous applause, Arthur Davenport, who had been watching from the back of the crowd, made his way to the stage. He took the microphone, his presence commanding immediate silence. "A year ago," he began, his voice resonating with emotion, "I had given up hope for my son. I saw a man driven by greed and ego, a stranger to the values my late wife Eleanor and I tried to instill in him. This project was not an act of philanthropy. It was a last, desperate attempt to save my son from himself." He turned his gaze to Julian, and for the first time in Julian's memory, his father's eyes were not filled with expectation or disappointment, but with a profound, aching pride. "Today, I see a man my mother would have been proud of," Arthur said, his voice thick. Then he looked at Arya, who stood beside him. "But none of this..." he said, his voice ringing with conviction, would have been possible without the guidance, the strength, and the unwavering integrity of one remarkable woman, Miss Aria Montgomery. He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle over the crowd and especially over Julian. What none of you know, and what I have never told my son, is why I chose her. It wasn't just because of her strength. It was because her story is one I know well. 40 years ago, I was a young, arrogant man with a lot of money and no sense. I walked into a small diner, and I was rude and demanding to a young waitress who was working 2 jobs to put herself through night school. She was proud, intelligent, and she didn't let me push her around. That waitress, Arthur's voice cracked, was Eleanor, my late wife and Julian's mother. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Julian stared at his father, his face pale with shock. The pieces of the puzzle, the intensity of his father's investment, the strange personal nature of the punishment, it all crashed into place with devastating clarity. When I saw the video of Julian and Aria, Arthur continued, his eyes now fixed on his son. I didn't just see a spoiled heir and a waitress. I saw a horrifying reflection of the man I almost was and the incredible woman I was lucky enough to meet. I saw in Aria the same fire, the same resilience, the same character that made your mother the heart of our family. I chose Aria because I saw your mother in her, and I was terrified that you had become the kind of man your mother would have despised. The revelation was a gut punch. This was never about a business lesson or PR. It was about his mother's legacy. It was about saving his soul. The weight of his actions on that night in the restaurant came crashing down on him, no longer as a matter of pride or humiliation, but as a deep personal betrayal of his mother's memory. Tears welled in Julian's eyes. He walked across the stage past his father and stopped directly in front of Aria. The crowd was silent, watching the final act of this very public drama. He didn't speak for a long moment, simply looking at her, seeing her for the first time, not as a symbol of his punishment or an obstacle, but as the person who had inadvertently saved him. Aria, he said, his voice raw and unsteady, I am sorry. Those words are not enough for what I did. It was cruel and it was unforgivable. You didn't deserve it. I was a monster, and you showed me what it means to be human. You have more character and integrity in your little finger than I had in my entire body. Thank you. It was a genuine, heartfelt apology, stripped of all artifice. It was the confession of a man who had finally seen himself clearly. Aria looked at him, and for the first time she offered him a small, genuine smile. The past is the past, Julian. Look at what we built. That's what matters now. Later that day, after the crowds had dispersed, Arthur found Aria looking out from the centre's new rooftop garden. The Rolls-Royce keys, she said, holding them out to him. I don't need them anymore. The job is done. Arthur gently pushed her hand back. The job is just beginning, he said. I'm offering you a permanent position as the head of the Davenport Foundation, not as a test for my son, but because you are the best person for the role. The car comes with the territory. He then handed her a thick envelope. Inside were documents confirming that her student loans had been paid in full, and a grant establishing the Eleanor Davenport Arts Scholarship at her university, with her named as the first recipient. Aria looked from the documents to the city skyline, a future she had never dared to dream of stretching out before her. She had walked into the Gilded Sparrow as a struggling waitress. She left as the architect of her own destiny, and the redemption of a man who had thrown food at her, never imagining she would one day hand him back his humanity. In the end, this wasn't just a story about a rich man learning a lesson. It was a story about how our worst moments don't have to define us. For Julian, an act of cruel arrogance became the start of a painful but necessary journey back to himself. For Arya, a moment of profound humiliation became the catalyst that unlocked her true strength and potential. The Rolls-Royce keys were never the real prize. They were just a key to a door. It was Arya's courage and character that showed her what to do once she stepped through it. Their story reminds us that dignity isn't something that can be taken away with an insult or bought with money. It's forged in fire, proven in adversity, and is ultimately the most valuable asset any of us can ever possess. If this story moved you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you don't miss our next real-life drama. Until next time, remember that sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest, most unexpected moments.